Okay.
Halo.
Halo, Pak, Bu, saya mau share presentasi, tapi screen-nya nggak bisa di-share. Apa bisa, atau saya kirim aja? Udah bisa? Ah, oke. Terima kasih.
Kita mulai ya.
Ya.
Oke, silakan Mas ya.
Great.
Bentar, Mas ya. In English, okay?
Okay, yeah, I'll start.
Okay.
So I am going to present. Let me know if the screen looks okay. Or if there is any problem, just interrupt me during my talk. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for having me this afternoon to share with you a little bit about basically building a data career, but also some examples of how data science is applied in cybersecurity, which is right now the field that I am working in. So I am Ernestasia Siahaan-Bauszat. I will share a little bit about my background before we start. Today, what we will be talking about is related to my background. I will share a little bit about a nonlinear road to a data career that kind of mirrors what I myself has experienced, and perhaps would be like I wouldn't say an inspiration, but maybe also an idea for any of you in the audience who are thinking to take a career in data science. I will talk a little bit about the soft skills as a data scientist, because we are probably aware already about the technical skills that are required for building a career in data science. But what about the soft skills? And it's and there are some aspects of it that I think are very particular and would be interesting to discuss. And finally, I will share a little bit of data science and analytics in internet security, because right now I am working as an analyst in account security field, and I hope these examples would give a little bit of an idea of what is currently, or what we currently do in the internet security field related to data science and analytics. So I am not aware of your background in cybersecurity, or how familiar you are with cybersecurity. So to give a little bit of a feel of how important the field is, I prepared some numbers to start the presentation with. So yeah, so last year we had the COVID-19 pandemic, which forced everyone to stay at home, most people to stay at home and work from home or study from home for school. And during the COVID-19 pandemic last year, there was a rise of cybercrime up to 600%, which is great for me, because that means I still have a job. My job is very important. But it shows that it is a very there's a lot of work to do in this field. Since 2018, in a day, there are around 80,000 cyber attacks happening all over the world, which means that there are over 30 million attacks in one year. So this gives you a little bit of an idea of the of how big the space is, how big the work that there needs to be done in cybersecurity. And later in this presentation, I will share with you what are some of the things that that is being done in the field, leveraging data science and or artificial intelligence to help solve the problems in cybersecurity. Okay, so before we go to that part of the presentation, I am going to share a little bit of my background. Why am I talking about this? So I finished my master's. My background is in computer science, so I did informatics engineering in ITB Bandung, and then after that, I did my master's in computer science in Taiwan. That was my first. That was my first introduction to machine learning. So I was working on audio recognition for my research in my master's degree. After that, I continued my PhD, and I was working on multimedia computing in the Netherlands. Here, I was working on image processing, so building models to predict how users would evaluate the quality of a video or would appreciate the quality of a video of an image that they are seeing. I then continued to do postdoc research also in the Netherlands, and there I was working also on building models to predict user perception of quality in the virtual reality space. So at that time, we were working with virtual reality applications. After that, I decided I want to work specifically more on data. It doesn't matter which field. It doesn't have to be multimedia field. And I got a position in Google as a data analyst, which is in the field of account security. And that is how right now my focus is on cybersecurity or internet safety. So, excuse me, I have a little bit of a cold. Yeah. So yeah, basically I've worked with data since my master's degree. I've worked with audio, images, I've worked with text, logs, data. There's a lot of different tasks that is being done in this space. I'm pretty sure all of us are aware of it. You do exploratory analysis, visualization, statistical analysis, data labeling, predictive modeling, building data pipelines or workflows, doing A/B tests, and so with these skill sets, it was not very. It was pretty straightforward to think that I want to work in data science or data analysis. You can apply these in different kinds of data types. These skill set. Yeah. So there are different paths to a data career that that you might find when you go to companies or maybe even research institutes. Mostly you would hear either data scientist, data analyst, or data engineer. Data engineer would be more software engineer skill set that is required. But for data analysts and data scientists, you really leverage mostly analytical skills, critical thinking skills, and for data scientists specifically, most of the time you would be required or you would be expected to have machine learning expertise or at least some background. But we're not here to talk about all of the technical skills, because these are, I'm pretty sure all of us here are familiar with the technical skills required for data science or artificial intelligence work. Machine learning, Python, statistics, among all the different different other technical skills required. But I want to share a little bit about the soft skills that that would bring you even further in your skills as a data science or a data analyst. So what are these data soft skills? So basically, it's not just important that we know how to transform raw data into a machine learning model or a statistical model, but there are some soft skills that would help you actually to make sure that you are answering the right problems, bringing in the right solutions. The first soft skill that I want to share is being an excellent data communicator. So I highlight here the 3 questions that I think is the goal of being a data scientist or a data analyst, is to answer not only the what, but also the why and the how, and even bring it further to answering the question, so what and what then? What this means is that when you have data and you process it to become information, it's not enough for decision makers or for the users of the data that you have processed. So you want to bring it one step further to say, I am looking at this information and I understand why it is like this. Why is the data behaving in this certain way? I have my hypothesis of how this is. This has been. This has shown up to be like this. But most importantly, I want to be able to tell my users or my stakeholders, so what? Why do they have to be interested in this knowledge? For example, if I tell my stakeholders that based on some user logs in using my app, that I see that a lot of users are logging in using old Android phones, because maybe old Android phones are cheaper to get. It doesn't mean anything to them. There's no call to action. So as a data scientist or data analyst, it is important to bring in the so what. So what if there are if most of our users are using old Android phones? I bring it further by saying old Android phones related to my field, cybersecurity, maybe are more vulnerable to being hacked or to being compromised by bad actors. And so we need to take certain actions based on the data, the knowledge that we have gathered from our data that we have analyzed. So that is the next level that you need to, whenever you work on a data, it's important to understand why are you working on the data, but also what then, like what is the end goal that you want to see from this. You have a data set. Sure, you can bring in you can work on some predictive models on it, but then what is the call to action that you want to bring at the end. Another soft skill that I think nowadays are being talked about a lot is about bias. So it is important to be aware of bias. And what is bias? As humans, we all have a cognitive bias, which is basically the way that our brains are naturally wired to think, to help us actually in our survival. Right now, as humans, we no longer work as a hunter-gatherer, where we have to like survive in the wild, but there are still cognitive biases in our brains that are that have evolved over human history to help us make fast decisions in critical situations. And why do we need this cognitive bias? Is because our brains are very limited in its capability to process information. So we have this cognitive bias in our brains. We might not always need it in the same way as our ancestors have needed it, but it is there, and it can create systematic errors in judgment if we are not aware of their presence. So there are multiple types of biases that might interfere with the way you interpret your data or handle your data processing. And I will talk a lot about some of them right now. The first one is confirmation bias. So what is confirmation bias? Confirmation bias is basically the way of the way that we think when we are faced with facts and evidence, it's clouded by our beliefs. And so even though, as you see in this diagram that I have here, even though there are a lot more facts and evidence present, our brain kind of filters the ones that confirm to our beliefs. And this could be very this could interfere with the way you interpret, for example, your findings. So especially in research, maybe you start out with some hypotheses that you think, these are variables A and B are correlated with behavior C, and this is what we want to find in our experiment. In a way, it's also kind of that we believe, or at least that's what we expect to happen. And so sometimes when we look at our experiment results, and maybe they are not exactly conforming to our hypothesis, we might explain it already in a way that is biased towards what we believe to have to happen. I have here like an illustration of it, where because you have, I will read it here. So here there are two people that are meeting, and already in the beginning, the lady on the right has a bias that the guy on the left side is a bully, and the guy responds, "I'm not a bully, but because you already have a bias, everything I say will sound like bullying to you." And of course, at the end, the lady is saying, "Can you repeat that you implied I was a witch?" So basically, as you see, already the way that we respond to something is heavily biased by our belief towards that. And so it's important to understand this, that whenever we look at our results or our data sets, or even the way we design experiments, that we step back and think, am I influencing this with some kind of bias that I already have? Another type of bias that I want to talk about is availability bias. So availability bias is the over-reliance of the events or data that we can immediately think of. So here I have this graph that says the blue circle basically shows all the information that is present, that is available to us in the world, but the information that we make, the information that we use to make a decision tends to be only a small part of all information that is present, because we have this availability bias, which means that we tend to only remember what is recent, what is frequent. We also tend to overemphasize what is extreme, what is vivid, and what is negative. a good example that I like for explaining availability bias is, for example, when we talk about how lately in this world there's so many bad things happening, which is not necessarily it's not necessarily that there are only bad things happening, but we tend to remember that, and we tend to only focus on that because news that we read or news that we see on television tend to be only bad news. The second reason is that, again, our brains are wired to overemphasize things that are extreme or that are negative. So this is an example of availability bias. So maybe when you think about finding if you want to collect, for example, data for your data set, let's say for you want to build a model that predicts how people can become successful, and then there are certain people that immediately comes to mind, certain successful people, but this might not be. But if you want to build a model that is actually really represents, not really, like, it's hard to build a model that really represents the whole world, but like represents the world better or closer, it's good to be aware of this bias to make sure that you are actually having you are actually covering more samples than what you can immediately think of. Yes. Another bias that I want to talk about is clustering illusion, and this is our tendency to find patterns in random events when they don't exist, because we are our brains are wired to find patterns, to detect patterns, and so this is another trap that basically can influence the way you look at your data. Here you have an illustration, like, I think as little kids like to do this, where you look at the clouds and then you say, oh, that looks like a dog. It's just a cloud. But because your brain, because our brains tend to see patterns, it's easy for us to see something and associate it with a certain pattern. This is also a very important thing to remember when you are looking at your data. I would think of one example is differentiating between correlation and causation, because it's very easy to see the pattern of causation when it's actually just correlation. And that can kind of bias your way of reporting your results, or looking at your data and evaluating your maybe experiment data. Another example of a bias that I want to talk about is anchoring bias. So anchoring bias is the behavior of attributing too much importance on information that is discovered or provided first, because it's easier to remember. That's why we talk about first impressions, because first impressions, or things that we see first, are very easy to remember, and then it becomes our benchmark. And what we see afterwards are things that we evaluated against our benchmark. That is just human behavior, but when you are working with your your data, you need to understand this bias and make sure that you do not have that it is not interfering with your work. So here I have an example to this to illustrate this. So you have two people, and they are asked to think about the two last digits in their social security number. So in Indonesia, maybe the two last digits of your KTP. And one person has a lower number at the end of their social security number, and then the other person has a higher number. And then they are asked to do a task that is completely irrelevant to the numbers. How much will you pay for this bottle of, here you have a bottle of wine. How much will you pay for this bottle if you were to bid for it in an auction? And because of the previous thought of a certain number, their response to this next task was actually very, very influenced by these initial numbers that they thought about. And this is actually a psychological experiment that they have done to uncover this anchoring bias. And it is also something that I think is very interesting to remember. This is especially important when you are designing experiments. So I've worked a lot with user experiments where I have to design experiments for them to evaluate, for example, images. And so you don't want your experiment results to be influenced by what they see first. So one of the things that you overcome this is by randomizing so that every person sees different images at any point in time. And so you can kind of it tries to overcome this anchoring bias in the experiment, in the data collection. Okay, the next bias is survivorship bias, and I really like this one because this is basically when you draw conclusions from an incomplete set of data because the data has survived some selection criteria. I really like this. The example for this bias is it was from the Second World War, where I don't remember anymore the country exactly, but there was some military people and scientists that were thinking of, okay, we have planes that our war planes that come back to us, and these planes have basically survived. They were not shot, so they could come back. And but you can see that, of course, they had like the like bullets or like where they have been shot all around the different parts of the plane body. And so they wanted to build a model to understand, to basically improve their planes by understanding where the planes are being shot. The problem is that if you are, in this case, they are only looking at the planes that survived or the planes that are actually like positive, and they are missing the data that are negative. So you also want to include the data that that failed the war in this case, because you want to know for the negative planes, where did they get shot that they actually immediately fell and couldn't come back to base or their country or whatever. So this is another bias that I think is also important to think about, especially in the context of collecting your data. All right, so up until here, please let me know if you have any questions, because it's very difficult. I cannot see any of your faces. So if you have any questions, go ahead and speak up. So from bias, another soft skill that that is also very important in as a data scientist or a data analyst is pragmatism, or are we solving the problem? So I guess this is probably not always applicable to academic research, but often in industrial work, it is very important to focus on. We want to solve the problem, so sometimes we have to make the trade-off that we can't always tune our model, or we can't always use we might not need to use the state-of-the-art model, but a model that actually solves the problem with enough with a good enough accuracy or good enough false positive rates, whatever your metric is, while also fulfilling the resource constraint that we have. So here's another like small comic to bring the point of pragmatism. So here it says, the guy on the right says, I'm a pragmatist. I like plans that are practical. And then the other guy on the left says, I like plans that can't be implemented. It's way less work. And then the guy on the right says, oh, now my way sounds stupid. Again, it's very, so basically what this tells you is like, what exactly are you trying to solve? What is your metric? What is practical? That is, again, it depends on your context. If your metric is way less work, then the other guy is more pragmatic in a way. So yeah. So now, after talking about the data soft skills, I want to share with you some work in the security space. So examples of data science or analytics work in the security space. Do you have any questions so far? No?
Indonesia.
Sorry, Ju. Sorry, Bu Erna.
Kalian nanya pakai bahasa Indonesia.
Yes.
Silahkan. Ya, bisa langsung aja.
Ernestasia, can you hear my voice? Oh, can I speak in English also?
Bisa dengar?
Kurang kedengaran suaranya.
Bisa kelihatan nggak?
Suara saya.
Coba, Wi. Kedengeran ya?
Dokter bisa dengar suara saya?
Ya.
Saya mau tanya, nama saya Rekra. Sebelumnya tadi kan saya dokter bahas tentang critical reward bias. Pengalaman dokter nih dalam bekerja sebagai data scientist dan artificial intelligence. Apa sih tips atau cara dokter untuk improve supaya bisa identify and avoiding that bias, cognitive bias itu?
Saya ulangi pertanyaannya, siapa tahu kurang ini. Jadi berdasarkan pengalaman saya, apa yang bisa dilakukan untuk menghindari cognitive bias tadi gitu ya?
Iya.
Oke. Ya, jadi saya nggak punya kayak 10 step untuk menghindari cognitive bias. Tapi berdasarkan pengalaman sebenarnya yang kalau udah paham tentang cognitive bias ini, setiap kali kita mau melakukan satu bagian dari pekerjaan kita, selalu salah satu caranya yang saya selalu lakukan adalah sanity check. Jadi kayak kayak istilahnya mencari kesalahan atau di mana yang di mana di dalam proses yang udah saya desain atau proses yang udah saya lakukan, proses yang akan saya lakukan, saya bisa cari kesalahan atau kekurangannya. Misalnya ada beberapa bias ini yang mereka lebih applicable di bagian tertentu. Misalnya kayak tadi survivorship bias lebih di data collection, atau anchoring bias lebih di eksperimentasi, user experiment misalnya. Jadi tadi kayak kalau di eksperimen yang saya lakukan, ketika saya membuat user experiment, supaya tidak ada anchoring bias, saya harus merandomisasi pertanyaan atau sampel yang saya kasih ke user saya. Atau bahkan ketika memilih user yang akan menjalani eksperimen saya, juga saya randomisasi. Oke. Saya baru mendapat chat kalau jawabnya harus in English. Okay. So up until there, I hope it's clear. And then, for example, in another example in collecting data is so one of the examples that I've done before is still in my experiments. I wanted to build a model to predict image quality, for example, and so what I needed to do is I needed to label my data, and from various qualities, but another thing that I needed to check was, does this data set represent a wide enough variety of images, so image content. So, for example, if all of my images are only images of people, like close-up images of people, then even though maybe I have the compression rate, different compression rates to represent the different qualities, but it could be that the content itself interferes with the model because my model only knows to look at images of people close up in a close-up image, and so here I have to understand that, okay, maybe this could have been an availability bias because it's easier to find pictures of people. It could also be a survivorship bias. Maybe it was maybe I just had maybe from previous research, these were the images that seemed to be easiest to work with. So being aware of these pitfalls, is very important. And so I can then take a step and say that I need pictures of you know, not people that are like in different angles, or I also need content of nature. I need to also add other content into my data set. So it's really taking a step back and seeing where can this go wrong. Another example is I talked about correlation and causation, which was in the pattern in the clustering effect. So when you interpret your data, often the language or the wording that you use. So one example is if I see if I use the a Pearson correlation to correlate these variables with my these two variables. I've sometimes seen people interpret it as that these, or even like a linear regression model where you have like multiple variables predict another variable. How do you interpret this? What does it mean that one variable has a bigger effect on the other? Does it mean that this variable caused the other variable? That's not true. Like the way you word it is could be that you see when this variable is present, you see the other variable, but it doesn't mean that this variable causes the other variable. So basically questioning how you like the wording that you use and how you interpret it. That is also another way of really making sure that you minimize the cognitive biases when you look at your data. I don't think you can like entirely eliminate it, but it's good to be aware so you can minimize the errors that in your models or in your experiments by like questioning, how can this go wrong? Is this right? Why do I know? How do I know if this is right? And these are the ways to improve in that aspect. Does this answer your question?
In some way, you want to say we need to explore the data and the possibility about what we want to experiment.
Sorry, come again.
In some way, while your answer, we need to explore first about the data, so we can avoiding the cognitive bias and we to about what we want to experiment.
Yeah. So being aware of it and always question everything before moving forward. Also, another thing that actually I thought about it, but I forgot to mention is review. Have another person review it and question also. So don't work only. Don't work in isolation. Let's say that's why we always have review processes, right? I mean, in the university space, we have peer reviews of academics reviewing journals or reviewing your work, but also your peers or your colleagues can also review, because then you have a second pair of eyes or three other pair of eyes to make sure that that it makes sense, to make sure that everything is as objective as they can be. Yeah.
Thank you, Doctor.
Okay. Are there any questions more? If not, then I will move forward. You can go ahead.
Okay. Ya.
Okay.
Oh, ada pertanyaan di chat itu.
Okay. Lanjut or?
Question in
Ada
chat.
pertanyaan.
Yeah. Go ahead. I listen.
You can see the question in the chat group.
In the chat, okay.
Okay.
What should we do to explore this field of data science is related to the very fast innovation in supporting technology and algorithms that are developed. Because one technology has not been successfully tested and updated technology has come out. Okay, so what you're asking is how do we make sure we are keeping up with what's happening? Yeah, this is a very good question. I also wonder how. No, but so it's true. It's true that there are always new things coming out, and it's a very fast-paced industry. I think not only data science, but also just computer science and technology in general. Definitely read a lot or follow, like if it's possible, follow like conferences. This really depends also on your goal, I would say. So if I may say, I think in like up until now, I still go every year to a conference where I could learn what other people, like what are the new things that people are doing. I might not always need to implement or to apply what I see into my own work, but this is one way to keep up with what is happening. And then if you have like an algorithm or a library that like a new library that comes out and you want to try it, then I think it's always welcome to try it on your own time, maybe as a hobby. But if you're talking about how do I keep up with what's actually with what people are doing, then I think following a conference or webinar regularly, as much as your time and budget allows, is very important and helpful in this case. But if that is actually not possible, I actually also like to listen to podcasts. There are a lot of podcasts on data science and AI that are for free. And these are also very good ways because they often have people from the industry that share about their latest technology that they are using. I think these are some of the ways that I personally also do. Does this answer the question? Maybe I would assume it answers the question, but if you have a follow-up question, you can always write again in the chat. Okay. Okay. So I will continue with some examples of work in the security space. These are some work that I've read about, and I find them very, very interesting and very exciting. So one of the first one is automated threat actor tracking at Microsoft. So I have the source link there. This is like available to read on their blog. But we can discuss them here. What is threat actor? So I will first start with what is threat actor. So in the cybersecurity space, we have what we call advanced persistent threat groups. And these are basically like bad actors or threat groups that are often backed by government institutions to basically either do cyber espionage or just infiltrate systems for whatever goal that they have. And to give you one example, is there are many examples of these like big cyber attacks. One example is that has quite a big impact, not only to one country, but even multiple countries, was a cyber attack that is called NotPetya in 2007. So what happened is that there is a software for tax accounting in Ukraine, and the company that developed this software was compromised, so that when the software update is being pushed, a malware was spread using the software update. So this software is used by a lot of different companies. So you can imagine that the impact is not only in this one company, but multiple companies. And basically this cyber operation affected Ukrainian companies and worldwide companies that had interactions with Ukraine, because then the malware could spread via the software update. And what it does, it basically overwrites important files on infected computers. And you can imagine this affected banks, this affected hospitals, basically affected critical infrastructure. So there are many of these types of cyber attacks. These are basically, because these groups are backed by government, they usually have they usually probably have funding to actually do very impactful attacks. So the goal here is basically that we want to detect an attack and predict how it will progress, so that we can stop the bleeding or stop the damage as soon as possible, so it doesn't become bigger damage. Now, these threat groups typically follow certain what we call TTPs, or tactics, techniques, and procedures in their operations. So you would have, for example, you would often, if you Google about these APT groups, you would often have numbers associated to them. So for example, APT 28 is backed by government from X country, and they usually have a TTP that is spreading this particular type of malware, or APT 38 backed by government Y, and their TTP is usually they go phishing. They target like journalists, or maybe they target politicians from another country by sending phishing emails, for example. So here I have an example of a TTP to give an illustration, which is phishing that targets journalists of certain countries, and then once they are in the journalist's email account, they extract data from from the inbox and plant malware in the victim system by maybe luring the victim to click on a to download a malicious file. So this is an example of TTP. So as I mentioned before, basically we companies like Microsoft or Google, or maybe in the previous example, right? The company that developed the software, Medoc. These companies would want to detect this kind of attack as soon as possible, so that it doesn't damage their customers and then damage their reputation. So Microsoft built an automated way of detecting these kind of attacks and immediately sending a notification to the victims so that the victims could take steps to secure their accounts or secure their systems. So here is an example of how that works. So you would have a threat actor that comes and in their initial access, they compromise a device using a remote desktop. And then this action of the attacker compromising the device is picked up by the tracking model or by the automated detection model. And the model, I will talk about the model after this. So, and then the model starts to examine the attack. So usually it's very hard to immediately say, oh, this is threat actor A, just based on one action, because I mean, like most of these threat actors also do some similar stuff. So, but when you have a combination of their actions, then it's pretty easy to say, oh, this is likely, there is a high chance that this is threat actor, I don't know, 28, threat actor 13. So basically what the model needs is basically to examine the sequence of actions, or like the combination of actions and other signals that they see during this attack. So after the attacker compromised the device, they saw that the attacker was copying, the attacker was copying some tools to the compromised device. And then using these tools, the attacker then runs credential theft, trying to harvest username and passwords from the infected device, and attempts to tamper with the antivirus. So here we have already multiple actions from the threat actor. And what the model does is that now with having these multiple signals, the model can attribute the attack with high confidence and say that there is an attack going on from threat actor A. And then the result of this model is then given to some analysts to evaluate, and then to send a notification to the victims. And because of the fast response, thanks to the help of the model, the victims organization could then receive notification and stop the attack. So if the attack was, I think this was actually, it happened and they were able to detect it in 2 minutes. But if the organization have not stopped the attack, what would have happened is that the attacker could have done much more and actually do even more damage. So you see the next actions that are not numbered are basically actions that could have been done by the attacker if the model did not detect it fast enough. Okay, so how did they build this automatic detection model? So the data that they have was, they had a set of recorded attacks from past attacks, and based on these recorded attacks, they built a knowledge base of TTPs. So I mentioned already about TTPs before. So basically it was a knowledge base of this threat actor group typically does these kind of TTPs, this other threat actor group does another set of TTPs. And then what they used to model these TTP to predict a threat actor was used by Bayesian network. So given the TTPs of an attack observed in an organization, they want to identify the most likely threat actor involved and then the next attack stages. So, so they use Bayesian network to do this. So here you have an example. You can basically illustrate these TTP, the relationship between the TTPs and the actor into an acyclic graph. So you have different actions: transfer tools, network scanning, lateral movement, disable tools, modify system processed, and then the impact, and then the actor. And at each node, you basically have the prior probability of knowing that if this happened after this, what is the probability of this disabled tools, for example, happening after network scanning or without network scanning? What is the probability of it happening after transfer tools, but also before network scanning? Or so basically using these, they modeled the likeliness of all of these actions with relation to other actions that are, and then associated with an for each attacker group. Yes, so here we have basically there are two inference tests that they did to build the Bayesian network. The first is structural learning. So basically, as I mentioned before, here they used together with the threat analysts or the domain experts. That was what I mentioned before. Like basically, okay, for this threat actor, we have seen A, B, C, and D actions, and so they designed the structure of the graph related to this threat actor. You have a question? Mm-hmm. Is there a question on the chat? Okay.
Bacaan aja.
Sorry for interrupt.
Mm-hmm.
There is a question from YouTube,
Mm-hmm.
like YouTube. When we are building a machine learning model,
Mm-hmm.
we face overfitting. Based on your experience, what is the way to avoid overfitting? Thank you.
Okay, yes. I think this relates again to the bias that we've seen. Basically, how do you avoid overfitting in your data? Is also making sure that the first one I would say is that your data should be representative of the that you have enough data, you have enough variety of data to test your model on. Because if your test data is basically, if your test data again is very similar to your training data, then your testing data will not, it's very easy to come up with a model that just overfits your training data. And so you always have your training data, your validating set, and your testing data, and making sure that they have enough like representativeness of the problem space. But yeah, make sure that you always have a separate validation set and test set for your model. Does that answer I hope that answers the question.
Thank you for your answer, Doctor.
Okay. If there's no more question, I can continue.
Yes.
Okay. So yes. So the next thing that then after they built the structure of the network, and then they conducted parameter learning to get the basically the probability value, or the probability values of the nodes. Yes, so that was the example from Microsoft, which is specifically for threat actor detection. Another thing that is another example that I think maybe you would be maybe how do you call it? You can relate to, because a lot of us use Gojek or Grab or Uber. So this is fraud detection at Uber, and they also published this article on how they do it. I linked it here on the slides. And so fraud detection, what kind of fraud are we talking about? So in applications like Uber, there are different types of fraud and abuse that can be done. There are payment fraud, where people can use stolen credit cards to make a transaction, and you want to basically detect this, and so you can block the payment. Incentive abuse, for example. Some drivers have like bonuses when they complete. Maybe if you complete 25 trips, then you get a bonus of $125. If you complete more trips, you get a bigger bonus. So naturally, this is something that users can abuse. They just they try to make a lot of trips as soon as possible, so that they can reach the bonus as without a lot of work. And then another thing is also abuse of compromised accounts. So maybe you want to bad actors can try to phish drivers or riders' accounts, so that they can then hack into the account and then get the money from the drivers or the riders. So as a company, you want to avoid this, because you don't want to basically it costs you a lot of money, obviously, but also it's not good for the user experience. You don't want your users to have their accounts compromised. So I will talk about some of the fraud detection that they did in the company that they also published. So one of the detections that they wanted to do is to avoid the incentive abuse that I mentioned before. One of the ways that people abuse this is by making fake trips. So you can use like a GPS spoofing. So you spoof your GPS that makes it look like you you've had a trip when you actually did not. I think if you've used, if you remember a few years ago, Pokemon Go was very famous, and you had to kind of like walk or to different places to gather awards, but that people were kind of lazy to do that. And so there were also ways that people bypass that by pretending that they were, by tampering with their location. So it looked like they actually moved to certain places. So this is the kind of thing that they wanted to avoid, also in Uber. So what happens is usually a fraudster or a bad actor would create a new driver or a new rider account. And then, a new rider account, so a user account, and then adds a stolen credit card. And then they would use that account to pay for a fake trip from their driver account. So they would have a rider account and a driver account. And in the driver account, they would have the fake trips. So what they did was that, what Uber did was that they modeled the, if you analyze the altitude distribution of trips in a city, you can actually, you can separate the fake GPS measurements with the real ones. So the distribution is very different. And so knowing this, they created GPS profiling for different geographical locations around the world. So using historical trip data, they would build an altitude profile for all geographic locations. And so you see here the green dots are the profile that the green dots show basically the real profile of a certain geographic location, and then typically the fake trips would end up having a higher altitude, or basically having a very different altitude than the profile, than the baseline profile. So this is one thing that they used as a feature in their detection models. Another thing that they also use to prevent this, to detect this kind of fraud, is by developing hourly speed profiles. So if you think about, for example, an example, for example, Jalan Esparman in front of Santo Tomas. Every day, there are the level of traffic jam in this road is very different, right? So like at 7 a.m., it's very different from at 2 p.m. At 2 p.m. when the students are, actually 7 a.m. is when they start school. Let's say at 10 a.m., it's very different than at 2 p.m. At 2 p.m., the students are, the school is finished, and so the students are going home. And so you can imagine that there is a traffic jam there, and there is the speed that people can drive through Esparman on that hour is very different from the speed that they can drive through it in, let's say, in the night or at 10 a.m. So what they did is also basically develop, using this, knowing this, observing this, they developed an hourly speed profiles for global road segments on each day of the week. And so you see here that they could compare two different trips and say that two different roads, and see that like 14.5% of the trip has abnormal speed, while the 0.2% has, while the other trip has only 0.2% abnormal speed. And so most likely the left trip is a fake trip. So they use this also as a feature in their system. And basically using these features and some other additional data, like real trip data, and then they used emulator data to add to bad examples, to build their detection system. So they used a combination of machine learning with manual reviews to detect fraud at the company. Another example is detecting fraudster behavior using sequence modeling. So here, what they wanted to do is basically model the interaction patterns within the app. So their hypothesis is that normal users have very different interaction patterns with fraudsters. So the way they scroll through the account, tap the different menus is very different than bad actors, because there are certain sequences that, like, a user would probably first put in location and then compare the different drivers and then choose one option before they do while they are in the app. While an abusive or a fraudster would probably like tap through the app, I don't know, faster or more sporadically, because they just want to make a transaction as soon as possible, because time is money for them. So so using this hypothesis, they wanted to see if they can detect fraudster behavior by using the tap stream sequence. So they viewed the tap stream data as a time series and used one-hot encoding to represent each tap, and added the timestamp of the tap onto the one-hot encoding vector. And then how they modeled modeled this to predict the fraudster behavior is that they used LSTM, or like long short-term memory neural network, and they use this using these one-hot encoding vectors as features. And basically, the final activation layer of that neural network is a probability score that predicts if a sequence of taps is actually from a bad user or if it's actually from a good user. Yeah, that was the example from Uber. There are many other examples to keep internet users safe. A lot of work that we do, basically phishing detection, account compromise detection, to detect when someone else is signing into your account and not you yourself. Product abuse, like similar to the example from Uber, where the driver would make fake trips. Maybe there are other product abuse, for example, when someone builds when someone uses multiple accounts to get rewards from, I don't know, from a game or from other apps, basically preventing abuse and compromise in different types of internet apps. Yeah, so these are some of the examples. I hoped it was useful. It added some value to your afternoon. Let me know if you have questions.
Tanya, nggak apa-apa, nanya aja pakai bahasa Indonesia. Mungkin ini bisa jadi ide juga buat kalian untuk tesis kalian, kan, di bagian data yang tanyain aja. Kira-kira kalau misalnya tentang keamanan, bagaimana ya peluangnya gede gitu misalnya. Kira-kira silakan. Ada yang mau ditanyakan? Boleh pakai bahasa Indonesia?
Gak apa-apa.
Ada yang mau ditanyakan? Wih, apa tentang security atau segala macam? Yang lain mungkin tentang data apa? Kalian pernah data saya, silakan. Karena lagi kalau mau nanya lagi silakan. There is no other question, Tasya.
Okay. Yeah, I leave it to Bu Erna, maybe to, I don't know, close the session or.
Oke, Dr. Tasya.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ernestasia. Thank you, Dr. Ernestasia, for your presentation. We hope that this presentation can improve our knowledge and in data science or in security. For the closing statement, I please Dr. Erna will give a closing statement. The time is yours, Dr. Erna.
Okay, Dr. Tasya, thank you for sharing with us. He has given a much clearer understanding of data security for the students. Thank you again, and I give back to Marsha.
Okay. Thank you also for the time and for inviting me. I hope it was useful.
Okay, bye-bye, Tasya.
Bye.
Dr. Anastasia, would you mind to share your slide presentation to us?
Yes, I will. I will send it maybe via email to Ibu Erna, and I will, and then or wait. Actually, I can share it via the chat here. Let me see. It is on Google Slides, so. Yes, do you see the link on the, everyone. I shared the link to everyone in the chat, so if you want, you can access it.
Okay,
Okay,
thank you.
thank you.
Bye-bye.
I will leave the meeting now. Thank you. Have a good day. Bye.
Good afternoon.
Bye. Oke. Nah, kalau kalian misalnya ada yang tertarik dengan data security